You ready for this? We're going to do a thumbnail. Lucky I went to the gym yesterday to practice. Oh, Jesus Christ. Happy Monday and welcome back to Drinking by Myself. My name is Emma and this is Balancing the Books. Ready for the spiel? If you don't already know, Balancing the Books is the game where every month I take all of the books that came onto my TBR and all of the books that came off my TBR and I try and make those numbers balance. We are trying to stop the constant growing of my TBR and so far we're managing pretty well this year. At the end of last month's Balancing the Books, we had got my TBR down to 46 books. So we kicked off August with 46 books to read. Let's see how many of those we got through. So the first thing I'm going to show you is all of the books that I hauled in the month of August, so we can see how offset my scales were to start with. So the first thing I hauled was this entire box set of Anne of Green Gables. So this was actually for a sponsored video, which if you cast your mind back all the way to the beginning of August, which feels like literally 3 years ago. I swear August was the longest month we've had so far. It felt even longer than March, and March our entire world changed and so it seemed to go on forever. Anyway, August was a long month, but at the beginning of it I did a sponsored video that I will link to in the description box or on a card, which I think will be that side. I never quite remember which side they are, but I think click there and you'll get to watch it, where I attempted to read all of these books in one weekend. That video was sponsored by Books to Door UK. I'll put their link in the description box as well, and the link to this product page. They, as I said in that video, are this amazing website where you can buy box sets and collections of authors for like literally incredible prices. I'm going to be using them so much, and so many of you have sent me messages showing me the hauls that you got from Books to Door, and like their prices are literally unbelievable. So they sponsored me to read all 8 of these books, and so the first thing that happened was they sent me these books and they went onto my TBR, so that was already an increase of 8 books. I also hauled this book, Half a Yellow Sun, by Chimamanda and Ngozi Adichie. My friend actually lent this one to me because she saw how much I enjoyed Americana, so this was her next recommendation. I hauled Kindred by Octavia E. Butler, which was an interesting choice because I have only ever read one Octavia E. Butler book before. As part of my book club with my friends, we read Parable of the Sower, and I hated it. I could not get into that book. I felt so detached from it. I was just bored the whole way through, so I really complained about that book. So surprising that I then went and bought another Octavia E. Butler, but I had just read the synopsis of this and it really caught my attention. And to be honest, the synopsis of Parable of the Sower didn't get my attention. So I kind of knew going into it that that book wasn't for me, whereas this book, which is about a 26-year-old girl who time travels, she finds herself like thrown back in time to the 1800s where she's a young black woman and she meets this young white boy called Rufus who she has to save from drowning, and she keeps kind of being thrown back and forth in time to try and keep this boy alive, and she finds out that he's actually going to be related to her, like his children are going to become part of her bloodline, and so she has to keep him alive so that she can be born. But it turns out this boy will also grow up to become a slave owner, and so it's this very complicated emotional challenge for her. So I thought that that sounded fantastic and much more my kind of thing than Parable of the Sower. So I was just in Waterstones, my first trip to a bookshop in like 6 months. It was so exciting. Went in with my mask on and everything. I was very nervous, but I saw this book. They had it like displayed on their facing outwards display, and I just was like, fine, it's a sign, I just heard about it, there it is, I had to buy it. I hauled these 3 books, I will go through them in a second, but I ordered these in from the office for a video I made for Brownrigg, which I will link to. It was on books with cult followings, and so I ordered these in to show off in the video, and then wanted to keep them because I thought they all sounded fantastic. So Hitchhiker's Guide is like a cult classic, obviously that's why I put it in the cult books video, that I've never read. Oreo, much less well known, but it sounds really interesting. It's like a racial satire that's a loose retelling of the story of Theseus and the Minotaur, and apparently was like kind of forgotten. Like the first time it was published, it just went out of print, but then it got rediscovered and is becoming this rediscovered cult classic. And The Master and Margarita. This is my best friend Kelsey's favourite book in the world. She's been wanting me to read it for so long. She lent me her copy of it when we left school, and I held on to that book for 10 years without reading it until I eventually gave up and gave it back to her. But then, because I ordered this one in from work, I was I've got it again. I should really read it this time, because everyone who has read it that I know loves it. I've never heard a negative opinion. I don't know why I just keep being so reluctant to pick it up. But anyway, I hauled these 3. I hauled one that I've left on the shelf. 1 second. Here it is, Pages for You by Sylvia Brownrigg. This was another one that I ordered in from work for a video and then decided to keep. It was also for that same video. Yeah, so I should have showed that off in the collection with that, but I'd left it up there, so I didn't think about it. This is a queer cult classic about a young college student falling in love with an older woman who's a grad teacher at her college. Okay, oh, one more haul. I hauled Misery by Stephen King. I don't have it here. I actually hauled it twice. I hauled it as an audiobook and I listened to most of it as an audiobook and actually really enjoyed it. I know I can be a bit like hit and miss with audiobooks, whether they capture my attention or not, but that one did. But I then decided, as I was like 2/3 of the way through, I wasn't enjoying listening anymore and I wanted to switch. Which also I'm glad I did, because it started to get quite gory and I really did not want those bits and I would not have enjoyed having them read to me. Whereas when they're on the page, I could literally just pass the book to Archie and be like, can you skip until it's over, and then he could give it back to me. So that was a fairly big haul, but of those, let's quickly strike off the books that I did read this month. So going now in reverse order, because that's the order they are stacked up. I did read Misery. I just finished it right on the last day of August and I enjoyed it. It's really good fun. It's very, very creepy, but I didn't love it. Like, it was so page turning and I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to know what was going to happen. But then when I got to the end, I was more just kind of glad it was over. It's basically the story of this writer called maybe Paul Sheldon. That might be his name. I've already forgotten. I'm not good with characters' names. I think his name is Paul Sheldon, and he is the author of this series of books about a woman called Misery, and they are really best-selling and popular. He hates writing them. And right at the beginning of the book, he is in a car crash and he is seriously injured and his legs are completely broken, and he is rescued by a nurse called Annie Wilkes, who takes him back to her house. And that's where the book starts, him waking up in this bed in this house of a woman that he doesn't know. And it turns out that she is obsessed with him. She is his biggest fan. She loves the Misery novels and she is not going to let him go. And so it's horror. It's psychological horror because it's not supernatural, but it's just like absolutely horrific, the things that she does to him, and she wants him to write her a new Misery novel. So it was really good fun and I really enjoyed it as a page-turning story that I really wanted to know what was going to happen. Plot-wise, it's fun, but character-wise it didn't do anything for me, and that's what's most important to me. So I'm not now feeling like I want to recommend it to people particularly, or like I'm going to stay thinking about those people. The character of Annie Wilkes is very cliched. It uses a lot of negative mental health stereotypes. The book was written in the 80s and, you know, you can tell there are a lot of things that we wouldn't accept these days, or you'd hope we wouldn't accept these days. So it's very sexist. I found a lot of that quite jarring. The narrator's opinion of Annie Wilkes is so often steeped in gendered language. Like, she's presented to be horrific because she is unwomanly. I mean, I'll give it a 3. I really enjoyed it. I'm really glad that I read it. If you are looking for just a fun page turner, you want some horror but you don't want it to be supernatural, then yeah, it's great fun. But it's not, I have read only 2 Stephen King books, that and Pet Sematary, and Pet Sematary I loved a lot more than this one. God, I talk a lot. Okay, still going backwards. So before that, I read Pages for You by Sylvia Brownrigg, the one I just told you that I hauled about the college student in love, and I loved it. And it's funny because I so nearly DNF'd this one. I don't even know if you could call it DNFing because it would have been so early that it's more like just not reading it. But I read the first few pages and was like, I'm not sure I'm going to like this, because I felt like it was very overwritten. And I don't know if it's that calmed down or that I got used to it, but I stopped noticing that very, very early on and just completely fell in love with these characters. You have Flannery, who is the 17-year-old. She's young and naive, but not in a stereotypical cliche way. She knows who she is, and she is brave in going and getting what she wants. I really, really liked her as a character, and she is instantly very, very attracted to this woman Anne, who she sees her first in a diner and then realises that she's one of the grad teachers on her course. And she has initially this really intense combination of lust and then hatred because she's embarrassed about her feelings and embarrassed about always feeling awkward in front of Anne. But this does then, quite quickly, they begin a relationship. And Anne is also a really interesting, complicated character. She's much more withdrawn and closed, and somebody that I've met people like that in real life, and I find them so intimidating and so scary. I can't imagine being in a relationship with somebody like that. It would terrify me. But I think that's kind of what Flannery's bravery is, that she does. She just pushes on through and like makes Anne love her. And it's not a spoiler because it's written on the back to say it's about the blossoming and falling apart of their love story. There is a sequel that was written 20 years later called Pages for Her, and I am definitely going to read it now. What's annoying is that I used to own it. I was gifted it, but I'd never read or heard of the first one at that point, so I gave it away. But now that I've read and loved this one, I'm like, oh, I should have it back because I'm definitely going to read it, but I'll just have to get it again. And then coming back to this big boy here, you will have to watch my vlog to find out exactly what happened. But I did read/DNF all of the books in here except one. There is one book that I didn't get to for reasons that you will find out in the video, which means that 7 of these are knocked off my TBR, but 1 still remains. I'm doing this in a very strange order, and I hope that it makes sense and isn't super confusing. It probably is super confusing, but we're just going with it. That is the end of portion 1, where we look at the books that got added to my TBR, but now we can bring that number down by looking at the books that I read from my pre-existing TBR. So these are books that I didn't just haul this month and then read, they're ones that have been languishing on my TBR for a while, but I finally read this month. First up, I read The Spy and the Traitor by Ben Macintyre, and I've actually already talked about this one on this channel. You can find my thoughts on this in the video I put up really recently called Books I Thought I Wouldn't Like, But I Did. Something like that. I'm sure the title was catchier than that. Anyway, I will link to that below and in the card, so you can go watch that. But yeah, that's basically what it says on the tin. This is a non-fiction book that my book club picked for us to read, and I didn't want to read it. I didn't think I would like it because it's non-fiction, not really my thing. It's history, it's about Cold War era spies. I wasn't excited at all, and then I loved it. Like, tore through it. What a fascinating story. Have not stopped talking about this story to anyone who will listen. It is so good and so interesting. So if you don't feel like clicking through to that video, I will just tell you quickly again what it's about. It's about a Russian man called Oleg Gordievsky who was a KGB spy and then became a double agent working for MI6. It's really, really tense because you know the whole way through, because of the prologue, that it's going to come to a head when Gordievsky goes back to Russia and finds that the KGB are onto him, that they're spying him and they suspect him of possibly being a double agent. And at that point it becomes so tense. Then I read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This was a book that my Patreons chose for me to read, and thank you so much because great choice. I absolutely loved it. So I have now read this kind of story in a few different iterations. So I've read the classic book Passing by Nella Larsen, which inspired this one. I've read Boy Snowbird by Helen Oyemi, which is inspired by Passing, and now I've read this, which is also inspired by Passing. It's the story of 2 twin sisters who are very light-skinned black women who, or black girls at the time the story starts, they're teenagers, run away from home and quite soon after separate, go down separate paths because one of the twins decides to pass as a white woman and she marries into this white family, and so their lives turn out hugely differently. And it's one of those books where we have these time jumps, we kind of jump forward through different stages of their lives and also the lives of their daughters and how differently their lives turn out and what happens when these daughters end up crossing paths. So I absolutely loved it. It's a really interesting story, characters that really stick with you, and just so much to think about in this book. And right from the beginning there were so many little moments that were just so thought-provokingly written. So like, for example, the twin girls were born and raised in this town called Mallard, which is a town, so I've just found the bit here where it's introduced. It was a strange town. It was set up by a man called Alphonse de Queer in the 1840s, who was a freed slave, and he's described as the idea arrived to him in 1848 as he stood in the sugarcane fields he'd inherited from the father who'd once owned him. So right from the beginning you get the sense of how complicated this relationship is, this man's relationship to his family who once owned him, his relationship to his blackness. And so he ends up being very proud of his light skin that he inherited from this father, and so deliberately sets up this town where only light-skinned black people can live and are welcome, and they pride themselves on kind of getting lighter and lighter skin with every generation. And it's this just very, very complicated, I'd never thought about it that way, how complicated the dynamics of race and colorism were when you kind of hear about Alphonse and some of the people in this town viewing themselves as superior to darker skinned black people, but then when it comes to it, they are still treated by the white people, they're all treated the same. They are all treated as completely inferior, and the white people don't care the shade of their skin. They are just hideous to them. Hideous, putting it lightly. I mean, there's really, really terrible things that happen in here, like to the twins' father, who is lynched by a bunch of white men, and it's just absolutely awful. There was a line, here it is, this line: lightness, like anything inherited at great cost, was a lonely gift. And there's so much just in that sentence alone. It tells you such a story. His lightness inherited at great cost, the cost being his slave-owning father raping his mother who was a slave. I mean, that tiny sentence tells this whole terrible, tragic story, and that just gives you an idea of how perfectly written this book is, how much she packs into short sentences, and yeah, I loved it. Then, very sadly, I DNF'd a book called The Mother by Yvette Edwards. I've had this one for ages, and I really thought I was going to love it. From the premise, it sounds like something that I would love to read. So it's about a mother of a black teenage boy who was stabbed to death by another black teenage boy, and she is now attending the trial of her son's murderer. And it's going to be about, I think he's being tried by a almost all-white jury, and so it's going to be about her journey to try and understand this boy who stabbed her son, and while hating him and hating what he did, also seeing the injustice of his trial. I think that's what it would have been about. I ended up DNFing this one. I don't even know how far I got, not that far, but you're completely in the mother's head in this story. You're hearing it from her perspective, and you hear her entire thought process over and over again. It's like she's describing and telling you everything that she's feeling every step of the way. For me, it was too kind of telling, not showing, I think. And maybe I DNF'd it too quickly, so I don't want to give like actual negative feedback, because I don't think I got far enough into it to be able to say that. You know, I nearly DNF'd Pages for You, and then I happened to keep going and loved it. So a lot of the time for me, I think DNFing is the exact like time and mood when you start reading something. So I don't want to actually criticise this book, it's just for me, I wasn't clicking with that writing style. So I DNF'd it. I read The Harpy by Megan Hunter, which is a very strange little book. This is the proof cover. I'll put a picture of the real cover because it's quite striking. I read this one literally all in one sitting. It's the story of a woman who, she's married and her husband cheats on her. And when she finds out, they agree that in revenge she can hurt him however she chooses, whenever she chooses, 3 times. And so it's this kind of dark story about her choosing when, how she's going to hurt him, but at the same time she has there's constant little interjections where she talks about her obsession with harpies, the mythical creatures, when she was younger, and so we kind of have this foreboding as we go that there is something slightly more fairy tale-y and surreal going to happen. Her transformation isn't just mental. It's good. I don't know what else to say about it really. It's a book that I probably will need to read again to fully get everything from it, but it's really, really, I mean, like I said, I read it in one sitting, I couldn't put it down, I just raced through it, and it's dark. Yeah. Okay, then I read a book called Trust Exercise by Susan Choi. This was one of my 5-star predictions. So I'm sure I will come back to this when I eventually do my wrap-up of my 5-star prediction video. It was not a 5-star, I'll tell you that. I should have known from the beginning. Even when I first bought this book, I remember standing in Waterstones deciding whether or not to buy it, and I looked on Goodreads and saw how terrible the reviews are, and for some reason felt like they're wrong. I'm better than that. I'm gonna get this book. And so I ignored Goodreads and I bought this book, and I eventually, it's been like a year since I bought it, I eventually read it, and they were right. What the fuck is this book? It so could have been a 5-star book. It so nearly was. It's so clever. When I described it to Archie as I was going, I was like absolutely just hating reading it, and I kept describing it to Archie and being like, God, it just sucks, but here's what is going on. And whenever I described it, I'd be like, it sounds so good. So basically, the first like half of the book, we are at this school, an art school, and we have these two teenagers called Sarah and David who are in love, and they're all very pretentious. It's very annoyingly pretentiously written, like incredibly pretentiously written. I hated the way it was written the whole way through. But, you know, I also quite like pretentious characters, so I was, you know, going with it. They're in love. They're all acting a bit weird at this school. We get these creepy English people who come over. So it's American, but we get these creepy English drama students who come over and put on a play, and they're all very creepy and they're all like crossing boundaries. So you start to feel a bit uncomfortable. Suddenly, it cuts, and that story is done with. And we find ourselves like 20 years later. We are no longer in the perspective of Sarah, who we were in for the first half. We are now in the perspective of a woman whose name we don't even ever find out, but we know that she is the real name of the person who for the first half was called Karen and was a very minor character. So it turns out that whole first half was part of a book that the girl Sarah wrote as an adult of her experiences, but it's a novel. And she created this character called Karen, and we now switch to Karen's perspective. But Karen's like, she lied about a lot of that stuff, like so much of what you just read in the first half wasn't even true. Even her own characterization, she's like, I recognize that I'm supposed to be Karen, but also this other character, Joelle, like, that was me too, and this other character, Patricia or something, I can't remember the names, that was also me. Like, it's like Sarah had split up the different parts of her personality to create these more like clean-cut, easy-to-write characters, and then this unnamed narrator is like, that's me, I'm Karen and Joelle and Patricia, these people didn't exist, she just split me up like that. And so we then follow her as an adult, but looking back on her time at this school, and we start to discover that characters we trusted from Sarah's retelling were actually the ones crossing boundaries and abusing power. So just like how Sarah split Karen into several characters, it seems like the English students were invented to take the negative qualities of the teachers that she did like, and actually they were the ones crossing boundaries. So that is so clever, and it could have been brilliant. I just recently read My Dark Vanessa, and it had a similar idea in there of how much the girl who was abused by her teacher in that book redefines her memories and experience, because that's the only way she can cope. She has to redefine it to make sense of her world. And so that is all brilliant. Like, this should have been amazing, but the way it is written is the most annoying thing in the entire world. It's like a book that I almost retrospectively want to give it 5 stars because it is sticking with me and it was doing something really clever, but my experience of reading it was like a 2-star. Like, I was just hating every second and I wanted her to shut up and stop writing. Is that incredibly harsh? Maybe, I'm so sorry. But we're still going. Nearly finished my wine and we're still going. Then I read Lock Every Door by Riley Sager. Lots of you guys have been raving about this one. This is my second Riley Sager. I read Final Girls a few years ago, and I think my view on Final Girls and my view on Lock Every Door are going to be pretty much exactly the same. Really fun. Really enjoyed reading it. Instantly forgot everything about it. The premise here is that we have a girl called Jules who takes an apartment sitting job, so she needs the money. She takes a job where she can live rent-free and actually get paid a ton of money to live in this incredible apartment in this building called the Bartholomew in New York, which she's admired her whole life, but has all these stories about it being haunted and stuff. And she's like, yeah, perfect, I'll take that job. But they have all these rules, like no one's allowed to come and visit her, she has to be there every night, she's not allowed to talk to the residents or like tell anyone where she is or stuff. So it's a bit suspect, and very quickly things get really damn creepy, and you find out that a lot of the other people who have done the apartment sitting there have gone missing without a trace. When the truth about what's actually happening comes out, it is completely ridiculous, but in a way that I'm not criticising because it was fun. Another really sad DNF. I DNF'd this book, Sun is Sky by Jedah Mayberry, and I got a long way through this one. I think I got halfway through before I DNF'd it, and I so I was so surprised. I really thought I was going to love this. So this was one that I bought. I ordered it a long time ago, or like, not a long time ago, this year. I ordered it back in March from Jacaranda Books. And this is about 3 generations of women in this family, and we are following the youngest, Penny, all the kind of things that I absolutely loved. And also, I know it's shallow, but such a beautiful cover. Like, look at this cover. I didn't want to DNF it because I want to like display that on my shelf, but I only keep the books I read and loved on my shelf. So why did I DNF this one? I got halfway through and I couldn't work out what had happened yet. Which isn't always a bad thing. If I'm absolutely loving a character and it's a very slow moving book, that's fine. But I couldn't work out what our main character's personality was, and I couldn't work out what had happened, so that was a bad combination. I think it just wasn't for me. So it's not a criticism of this book. I think that it's a book that wasn't written for me, and that's fine. And I'm sad to not have been able to engage with it the right way. One thing that I was really enjoying about reading it was I have been really trying for a long time, for years, but especially this year, to read more books by Black authors, and I've been really enjoying that. Read some really, really fantastic books, and a lot of those books are about race and about the experience of racism, and I've been really, I found those really educational and really good to read. Something that I noticed in this, which I really enjoyed while I was reading it, is that this book is not about race or racism, because there aren't white people in this book to be racist. This is about a Black family, and this is about relationships within a Black community, and I thought that was, it struck me that that was noticeable, because I don't think I'd realised before that all the books I'd written by Black authors were in some way about racism. And so it's almost like that's giving me a way to engage, a way to relate, because I know what it's like to be a white person who is working on their own racism, and so it's like it's helpful for me to see the racism, but that was really centering myself. And actually I was really enjoying reading this book that wasn't about white people's effect on Black people. It was about Black people existing in their own right. Now I have to stand up again because I have one more book that I read and I left it over there. Okay, here we go. My final book that I read in August was The Clapback by Elijah Lawal, and I absolutely loved this. This is a non-fiction book that it says here, your guide to calling out racist stereotypes. So each chapter tackles a different stereotype and explains a little bit about why those stereotypes came about in the first place, to show that they came about in very arbitrary ways or very harmful ways. A lot of them started from the time of slavery. He has so many statistics that I didn't know before that just made me shudder. And yeah, it's just brilliant. I really, really recommend this book. Is it the one I recommend most of everything this month? Possibly. I think I would recommend this one the most of everything that I read this month, because it's just really, really interesting, and also it does exactly what it says on the tin. I feel like it's armed me with statistics and facts and quotes and arguments that I can use the next time I find myself debating or arguing with somebody who expresses any of these things. Ooh, I'm exhausted. How long did I just talk? I really doubt that any of you are still here. If any of you are still here, what's a really random emoji that you wouldn't leave by mistake? There you go, the Ferris wheel. No one's ever left me that before. If you are still here, leave me a Ferris wheel emoji and I'll know that you are a good soul. But I would not be surprised if there are no Ferris wheel emojis, because I've just been talking for like 45 minutes. So let's look at the results. That's why we're all here. You can already see it because I will have put it on the screen as we go, but I just have to add it up. Okay, if I've added that correctly, I think that I hauled 15 books this month, but read/DNF'd/otherwise got rid of 17 books this month, which means I have successfully balanced the books and even brought my TBR down even further. My TBR is now 44 books long. So thanks so much for watching Balancing the Books for another month. Leave me a comment with your Ferris wheel and letting me know what you guys have read or hauled, or anything you want to tell me really about your reading this month. I am all ears. See you next time!